Hi and welcome to my OCR A A-Level Biology revision session with me, Christine. So today's lesson I want to look at the difference between conservation versus preservation. So let's just remind ourselves about why we need to maintain biodiversity. So there are economic reasons as to why we need to maintain biodiversity, such as the products derived from both plants and animals can be traded to provide income on a local and global scale. So there's valuable medicinal compounds that could be found, the genetic resources to produce new crops, and also reducing soil erosion. So these are all economic reasons. There are also aesthetic reasons for maintaining biodiversity because obviously it brings joy to millions of people going and seeing the natural world that's out there. So I went to Gamboa and I got to observe lots of different organisms in their natural habitat. So the places look good. Not only that, there's also an area for us to have relaxation and exercise if we go for a walk to see these beautiful nature reserves. So there are aesthetic reasons for maintaining that biodiversity. Obviously, our art, music, written work is all on the beauty that we see in the world. And once it's destroyed, it's impossible to replace. So it's important that we are maintaining biodiversity. Now, there are ecological reasons for maintaining biodiversity in the fact that all organisms are interdependent. If we think about a rainforest that create our climates, transpiration, the loss of water vapor from the leaves and the stems, that is going to therefore condense in the atmosphere, producing the clouds. That will then give rise to precipitation, that rainfall, which then puts the water back into the soil so it can then be taken back in along with the mineral ions to provide the plants with what they need to grow. Well, not only do we have that, but ecological reasons are also things like keystone species. We need to maintain the ecosystem as it is because there are very specific species that will play a key role in maintaining the structure of an ecological community. So you know that there are food chains where you have your producers are fed on by your primary consumer is fed on by your secondary consumer, and so forth. So if we use the example of our wolves that feed on the elks feed on the plants, the beavers and the songbirds rely on material from the plants. So the wolf is the keystone species. If we were to remove the wolf wouldn't feed on the elks, and therefore the elk population would increase, and that would result in the plant resource decreasing. That would have a knock-on effect on the beavers and the songbirds. So therefore, by ensuring that we have our keystone species, that will ensure that there is a natural maintaining of that structure of an ecological community. So conservation is a way in which we are going to maintain biodiversity. But what we're interested in is what's the difference between conservation and preservation. So preservation is where we're going to protect species and or habitats by keeping things exactly as they are. We are going to remove nothing and have very limited or no human interference. So this could be things like Antarctica, where it is only used for very limited tourism and scientific research. It's not mined, there's no industrial activity that goes on there, and that is to ensure that it is preserved, protecting the species and the habitat, everything exactly as it should be. So what's the difference then with conservation? Conservation is this preservation and careful management of the environment and of those natural resources. And if we remind ourselves about module 4, we should know that we can divide this into two categories: in situ conservation within its natural habitat, or ex situ conservation outside its natural habitat. So let's look at the in situ conservation. So one of the in situ conservations that we have are what's known as wildlife reserves. These are going to use active management techniques where we're going to control grazing, We're going to restrict access, so protecting ancient oak tree locations or nesting sites or the nesting grounds, controlling the poaching, feeding the animals that are present in these wildlife reserves, reintroducing species that might have died out, culling or removing invasive species. Now, one of the things we have to be very careful with is the ethical consideration when it comes to conservation. Because actually, is it okay to kill animals, to cull them, if they are invasive species? So if they are species that were introduced, they're not native to the area, and they are out competing the native species and therefore causing them to die out, is it okay to cull them? Or should it be that we allow nature to do what nature does best, and those that are best adapted to surviving thrive and reproduce and continue? So this is where, if they're going to ask a question, they'll be looking at you understanding the three types of considerations that need to come into play: the economic, aesthetic, and ethical. So remember, if it's an evaluate question, arguments for and against. Also, we've got the fact that with a wildlife reserve, we would do things like halting succession, halting the natural flow of succession to that climax community, and that would be a way in which we could maintain biodiversity. Now, marine conservation zones are areas in situ conservation within the natural habitat, and where we would control the fishing that goes on within that area. Ex situ conservation is obviously outside the natural habitat. So this would be where we'd be using botanical gardens or seed banks if we're looking at plants. And if we're looking at animals, we'll be looking at zoos. So regardless of what it is that we are looking at, if it's ex situ, it's outside that natural habitat. Now remember, when you do your revising, always make sure you go back and look at your module 4. So there are the 3 agreements that you need to know as part of conservation: the CITES agreement, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. There's the Rio Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Countryside Stewardship Scheme. Paper 2 is covering modules 1, 2, 4 and 6, so they will bring these 2 together when they are asking questions, and it will be applications and graphs which show you numbers for you to be able to apply your knowledge to. So I hope you've liked this video, and if you have, then please do click on the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you haven't already done so, please do check out my revision platform, www.aiqchat.com.